Yes, I can.
Okay.
All right. Dr. Gordon, we are live. Hello, intermediaries, Facebook family, YouTubers. Good evening. Um, this is a great night. Tonight, I have a very special guest, Dr. Thomas Gordon, who is a mentor, a brilliant mind, and the kind of person that you would want to call after having your best day, and someone I would say you'd want to pick up the phone if you're having a really bad day. That's how I would characterize him. Um, Dr. Gordon, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great and honored to be with you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Of course. Thank you for coming on. So we've got a lot to cover. So this episode is called Racism's Toll on the Black Soul. And originally when I conceived of this idea and I knew that you would be the perfect person to have on, it was really about energy, really looking at the toll that racism has in our everyday lives. And I feel like it's something that is not just Black people who feel it, but certainly in this country we're plagued with a lot of negativity just based on our history and our existence in this country. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit as somebody who has struggled with it, especially in the last week. There were news stories that popped up that made me feel a little overwhelmed. And I just thought to myself, one of the worst things I feel I can do, especially running a company like Intermediate and doing the work that I believe in, and then also sort of being in the marketplace of other practitioners like yourself, is to be quiet and to not invite people in and to have an open discussion about what it means to be on this side of the issue and this reality, which is very tough. So I know you can relate to that.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just run through a biography so everyone knows who you are, about your credentials, where you've been, where you've worked, and we'll run through that very quickly. Do you want to say anything before I get started?
No, just again, go for it and let's talk openly tonight, and maybe we will be a practical and emotional and thought benefit to some other folks that are tuning in.
Wonderful. All right, so Dr. Gordon, you are a licensed psychologist. You graduated cum laude from Harvard University. You have a master's degree and a PhD from the University of Michigan. You completed your postdoctoral mass media and conflict resolution study at UPenn. You've worked as a college professor, health and mental health systems manager, a psychotherapist, leadership coach, and organizational advisor. Your faculty affiliations are at least 8 different colleges and universities, namely Medical University of South Carolina, which is your home state. You are from Columbia, South Carolina, correct?
Yes.
You are married. You're the father of 5 adult children, and you have, here it says 5, but I thought maybe you might have 1 or 2 more. Is it still 5?
You can double that to 10.
Okay. Are you really?
Yep.
Wow. Wow. You speak Spanish and Swahili, and you play the tenor saxophone. I hope you have it handy, because I feel like we could use some slow jazz, some 90s film slow jazz for some of these topics. They're a little daunting. You describe yourself as an avid lifelong learner who travels globally for cross-cultural study and exchange, and that has included coaching youth basketball and mentoring rising professionals. Dr. Gordon, many moons have passed since Kendra Snipe introduced us, and I'll be forever indebted to her for that introduction. Kendra, I hope you're present tonight. I hope you're watching. Otherwise, this is you. And the first question is, how would you describe energy?
A quick way to think about it, and as a psychologist, we spend all of our time, in fact, the culture pays us to think about energy formatted in the way people think, because thought is creative. And when you connect with people, then you have co-creation as you stack your thinking with others. So in a way, you've picked the right abstraction, energy, to funnel down to specifics that come off of that, including how do you preserve it, store it, amplify it, restore it. It's a great topic and a great beginning. So a simple way to think about energy is to think about power and capacity to be powerful. And if you think about it that way, we can always think about the energy that's stored in a waterfall. And as gravity moves that water down, you can begin to turn generators to create electricity. The energy that's stored in a thought. And that thought can take you soaring to your best version of your best vision of yourself, or it can take you spiraling down to confusion and doubt. So you're really talking about capacity, and you're born with certain capacities, and you also are exposed to ecologies or contexts that begin to feed your capacities. And you can dampen them, you can attack them, you can destroy them, you can compromise them, or you can begin to build them up, depending on what they're exposed to. So it's never either or, but you're always thinking about power and capacity. And capacity can be your character, it can be your skill set. And right now, you don't want me to play slow jazz on my tenor saxophone because the local cats in the alley, the feline family, are howling every time I play real loud.
Well, the truth is, here it doesn't say how well you play it. So
Right, exactly. That's
maybe
why I said the energy that's coming through that horn of the sax is not yet at the right capacity for
okay,
the nature of the saxophone. So
got it.
everything has its structure and its processes, and you can feed it energy. So we're actually, each of us as persons are energy units, and we are bundles of energy, and we also generate energy by things that we take in, and we begin to transmit energy. So we're receivers, and we're also generators, and we're also transmitters of energy. And that's something that's so precious about the way you started, because if people can get that concept, then we have a lot of precise and particular choices and behaviors that we can adopt, and in order to have a life supreme, the greatest possible life. It's more challenging when you're in toxicity, things that are attacking your energy, but it's not impossible. And for all the people that play sports like basketball, we know that every shot isn't going to be a calm free throw. You know, there are places in the game where you get challenged, and sometimes illegally, but you still play the game. So I love the topic and the way you started it. Shorthand for me, I always keep in mind capacity and power delivered. So you're thinking about capacity, and you think about actually moving potential energy into kinetic energy, energy in motion, or energy delivered. Now, to do that delivery, you're going to have understanding of people and the way to get people engaged in a way that they can stack their capabilities to amplify the energy that you're delivering. But each one of us is an energy unit. So don't count any of us out. We're talking about the power of each one of us and the impact of all of us.
So thank you for all of that. Very well said. One, I would say I feel like one challenge I've had as a practitioner doing anti-racist work, trying to convey like the real meaning of what it means to work well with someone else and what it means to understand another person has been the underlying concept has been energy. And I don't know how well that's ever come across, especially in certain workplaces and certain circumstances, because I feel that when you talk about energy, people think it's hokey. Like, there's no real, like the way you just described it, really kind of anchors it in science. So I think people are more receptive to it. But when you talk about walking into a room, like I say, like, I think this is an example everyone can agree with. There's times where you've walked into a room and you look at one person and all of a sudden you feel something and it doesn't feel good. It's just, in the best way to say it is bad energy. Or you can be in a setting where there's absolutely no reason there's no reason to dislike someone or have a bad feeling, but you do, and you can't get rid of it. And a number of things kind of go into that. How have you in the workplace as a professional, as a consultant, what is the most concise way in which you have made this argument for energy and transference of energy and how that happens? Because I think, I think that this is important when we talk about what's happening even in our country right now and what has happened, that I argue there's like a legacy, there's an inheritance of bad energy. And to say that, again, some people just kind of pass that off and then think, well, whatever. But the truth is, this is rooted in science. It's not just a psychological thing. So please.
Exactly. And I have a nationwide practice as a leadership consultant and coach, and someone that designs and delivers leadership solutions. You and I hit it off instantly because I could pick up your thinking and your energy. And I lead with energy as a topic, even though people think it's spooky and they imagine you're going to sit with a flower in your hair and have everybody hold hands and sing kumbaya. And that's their projection onto the term. We're more familiar in a modern society with the deployment of energy to control, neutralize, and destroy things. So it's not that it's a foreign concept or people don't associate it with science and engineering. They just don't associate with the quotes feminine or softer side of organizational excellence. So the culture of organization is viewed as a womb or feminine part of business. And a lot of times you get disinvestment in that. And so what I've done is return people to their vision in the organization, their mission, and their aspirations for what they want to do in the world, and to see if we can use that as a context for what's driving your activity. And oftentimes the activity is scattered and not prioritized. Oftentimes it's driven by some people and other people on the bench. But I always unapologetically bring in energy quickly into the discussion because nothing lives and nothing moves without it. And we're all tuned in from our various senses: touch, taste, smell. Sight is very dominant with human beings. We stand erect, unlike other life forms, and we're noticing from a distance things with our vision, and hearing is very dominant. So people pick up tonality, and they assign energy or worth to it that will affect their own energy in terms of engaging you. So if I said to you, Ashley, I didn't say you were stupid. 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 You still stupid. See, I'm giving you tonality differences in the same content language, but I'm showing you how just an inflection in my voice changes the energy of the statement. And your sensitivity is called your intelligence. And a part of your intelligence is your intuition and your fear. And people confuse fear and intuition and make them something else. But this isn't spooky. This is a part of the design of the human being to basically pay attention to signals, signs, and symbols all of the time. So when you walk in a room, you can tell by somebody's body language or how they're the tonality, more so than the content. Sometimes you can sometimes tell visually by who's associated with whom. You begin to make certain assumptions, and that pattern making is what makes us a unique species, because with that pattern you're actually formatting the energy signals into a story. And the intelligent person is trying to get data to see, is that story valid and relevant? Is it updated and static, etc.? Or is it a story that's worth keeping? So you're letting go of some assumptions and you're holding on to others. Does that make sense? So one thing, just to continue with that point, is help people to interrogate. I help people to interrogate current state. What affects their sense of vitality and productivity, energy, and what tends to compromise it or zap it? And I'm deliberately making energy a legitimate discussion because energy is going to drive engagement, both on task as well as in terms of dealing with teaming. So it's a kind of lead-in topic. If you think about a big funnel, you would say if we look at energy widely, we can begin to funnel down to particular decisions that have been made historically or currently in an organization, the better to inform everybody involved about the benefit of some of the way we've used our time and energy together. People ask for time management work, and I'll often say it's clock time, but it's also everybody isn't equally productive at 24 hours a day. It's also about energy. So I'm looking, to answer your question, to legitimize a discussion of the human understanding of human energy and the human utilization of that understanding, and to turn it to the service of the particular vision of greatness or the mission of a particular set of people that I'm talking with. So that is a response to your question about how do we do it. We don't get intimidated or caved in about distorted projections onto a term if we think that term is useful. We are going to use the word energy because it's a useful term and it deals with reality, and it's a useful term to help us imagine a greater and better reality than the one we have. So we can actually transform current state to have a more magnificent tomorrow if we're willing to have the energy of thought leadership energy now begins to get calibrated into priorities and accountabilities and actions.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to let you know, I apologize. So I'm having connectivity issues. So I'm having a really hard time hearing you. And I hope nobody else is. I'm trying to get a message out to a couple people to make sure that it's not heard from, on behalf of whoever is watching. We've got about 11 people on right now. So forgive me, but I'm going to continue to move forward if that's okay with you.
Yes,
thank you.
Ask the chat room people in the chat to let you know if they can hear us.
Yes. So the first topic I wanted to bring up was I don't know if you watched the presidential debate. Were you one of the folks who did?
No, I heard and watched snippets and commentary about the debate, but I didn't watch the full debate.
Okay, so did you hear anything about when Biden brought up the fact that like racial sensitivity training had pretty much been removed from the executive branch or the executive office?
Yes.
I sent you the letter, and
yes.
And I wanted to read a few lines from it. And I thought this was important for us to talk about because essentially we are involved in this work. So I thought, well, we may as well just give it a go. So it has come to the president's attention that executive branch agencies have spent millions of taxpayer dollars to date training, quotations, government workers to believe divisive anti-American propaganda. So for example, according to press reports, employees across the executive branch have been required to attend where they are told that, quote unquote, virtually all white people contribute to racism, or where they are required to say that they, quote unquote, benefit from racism. According to press reports, in some cases, the trainings have further claimed that there is racism embedded in the belief that America is the land of opportunity, or the belief that the most qualified person should receive a job. So one of the very last lines of the first page says, in the meantime, all agencies are directed to begin to identify all contracts or other agency spending related to any training on critical race theory and white privilege, or any other training or propaganda efforts that teaches or suggests either A, the United States is inherently racist or evil country, or two, that any race or ethnicity is inherently racist or evil. In addition, all agencies should begin to identify all available avenues within the law to cancel any such contracts and or to divert federal dollars away from these un-American propaganda training sessions. Is how they characterized like critical race theory, is that incorrect to say that there is white privilege, and to say that there's like this inherent issue, like this is an inherent problem racism is? I mean, and that some people benefit as a result of the system. Like how is that untrue?
Okay, so let me respond to that quickly on several levels. One is I've been a leadership faculty member at, for instance, a system like the Federal Executive Institute, where federal appointees and staff people at various levels, Department of Defense, agriculture, et cetera, get
Yeah.
professional development. So his executive order to stop it is playing to a base of people that he wants to get to mobilize as we approach this election in roughly 30 plus days. And he's basically responding to a base of people with a either a dog whistle or a loud whistle to basically rally his base. Now, historically, I'm gonna get to critical race theory in a minute, but I want people to understand the tactic. It's historically what you do is disqualify discussions. And he had the executive order so that he could shut down a whole body of discussions and send a signal to a conservative base of people that he would call the right, the far right. Now, notice this binary trap in the United States. They will make people leftists and radical leftists, and they'll then have the right and the far right, etc. So the President Trump was really trying to say there's these Antifa and radical leftist people who are unpatriotic. And I am a patriot. And if you're a patriot, you ought to follow me. And my edict is going to shut down any discussion that's going to critique the United States. So it's a kind of thought process that says that we're exceptional in the world. We're a land of opportunity. We pat ourselves on the back for our meritocracy and our democracy. Now, if you look at history, you can see that when all lives mattered, there was a bunch of people creating a constitution in which Black people were 3/5 of a person, and the Native Americans and even white people with no property had no rights. So
or really weren't mentioned, right? I mean, there's really
exactly. So it's don't bother me with the facts. I've got a story to create. And if you look at history and you go back to somebody like the era of Paul Robeson was asked, would you fight in a war for the United States when your people are getting lynched publicly all over the United States and there's no accountability to citizens or police officers for killing them? And Paul Robeson said, that's a great question. And I can't say I would volunteer to fight. And they ended up saying, well, then you're a communist. So that's that's even past radical left, but it's part of the agenda. And when they were trying to get people out of the back of the bus, when they were trying to stop lynching, every time they would brand people as communists. So if you were a school teacher and you actually wanted to vote as a Black person, you got branded as a communist so they could then take your job away. And so if they didn't kill you, they would punish you financially. So it's a form of propaganda in which you disqualify people by making up a story about their worthlessness. Now, of course, if you step back for 2 seconds, you can see historically we've never been a meritocracy or a democracy. And if you look at it from a developmental human being standpoint, you don't have inherent racists. You have people born as babies. Too helpless and vulnerable to even know their name. They can't even live.
Yes.
You don't even trust them for 12 years before you even let them cross the street. So there's a lot of things that are developmentally installed in the people. So he's already made up terms like inherently that are just not historically right or developmentally appropriate. And he's trying to take off the table the idea of self-inspection of America, self-reflection on America. And that is a danger in a democracy. You want informed citizens thinking about beating yesterday, how we can be better than yesterday. And he's basically saying to inspect and reflect is unpatriotic. Now, where a critical race theory comes in is in the 30s, some social scientists were thinking about the power implications of Karl Marx's thinking about economies and classism as a destructivism, the hierarchy of class. So a lot of people start thinking about what's now known as intersectionality, that it's not just one thing like classism that keeps people oppressed. There are many things that happen to people based on things we target about them, and that these targeted attacks can mean you'll have a stratification of power. And you can look at institutions like educational credentials, you can look at race, you can look at gender, you can look at age, you can look at various things to start seeing intersectionality.
Mhm.
So this goes way back to the 30s, in which people are thinking about power dynamics. Well, in the 70s, a Black guy named Derek Bell, an attorney,
Mhm.
started writing about how in a society you can have legal breakthroughs like the Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954, but you can have institutional practices that don't deliver on the promise of those legal um, tools. And the 14th Amendment guaranteed equal access to all citizens and et cetera. But Bell was talking about we've got to be critical about racism, and we need to actually look at how things operate, not just assume because we have a law in place that things are going to operate fairly. A good example of that is people smoking crack cocaine got disproportionate sentences in prison
Mhm.
compared to people who were using powdered cocaine.
Yeah.
So he's saying if you look at 5 times as many white people use dope as black people, but 10 times as many black people go to jail for
Mhm.
substance abuse, then he's saying we've got to study oppression. And that's critical race theory. Now, the last point, then I'll turn it back to you, is people need to know what Bell is talking about is that race per se is made up. It's a social fiction that got weaponized. And you
Yeah.
can go to history and see where they had conferences. And you're talking to me from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That was one of the sites of a conference where they literally sat down and worked out 30 different hierarchical steps of worth based on race of the European ethnic groups. So people made this up. And he's saying the social fiction of race has now been turned into an ism, racism, and it needs to be looked at along with classism, ageism, sexism, and other isms because they are actually perpetuating oppression and really underutilization of the dominant groups who are getting some privileges and advantages from them, but also underdeveloping themselves. So race is made up, the racism is made up, but it's an ideology that artificially elevates the worth of one group over another. All isms have the same structure, and it's imposed on people. You don't voluntarily go to Walmart and buy it on the shelf. It's imposed, and it's imposed violently, so that your ideological absorption of it isn't around just for you to sip a cup of tea. It's imposed violently, and then it's reinforced by various more incentivized means, and it's set up an institution so it outlives the lifespan of Ashley or Tom Gordon, so that you literally have people taking on institutional arrangements where they get things done, and all the people in leadership are white, and
Mhm.
they don't have to think about it. They're
Yeah.
just operating off of their comfort zone and their network, and that's when you know you got an ism, and then you're looking at a subgroup, a very tiny group of people that are willing to practice outright racial prejudice and bigotry. And the president spoke about some of them when he said, "Proud Boys stand back and stand by."
Yeah.
So that's a small sector of people that are armed and go to, into the streets with their arms, and they have some of them have a philosophy that's anti people that don't look like themselves.
So for you, is critical race theory like a, do you kind of think of it as like a way of life, or for you, is it just like a methodology? Is it
It's it's both. It's both for me, and I would advocate it as a way of life. But for me, it's a way of life and it's a methodology
yeah.
because you can't drink your own bathwater. You can't go around saying my group is superior because I'm in it, and it's not. available for inspection. Anything's going to be better has to have feedback loops, informational loops coming back so you can grow, you can improve.
Yes.
And so I look at it as a lifestyle, not just a methodology, it's both and, because it's about growth at every scale. You must have critical inspection. In this case, you can have critical race inspection, critical class inspection, critical education inspection. You can turn the targets, but the concept is look for the value of people and how is that value actually being honored.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just be seduced by the critical legal infrastructure that's been set up. And at different points in history, we had the Civil Rights Act of 64, we had the 54 decision. You've had different things to challenge Plessy versus Ferguson and other kinds of legal structures that made us second class. But the people who look at critical race theory is saying, always look. That's your responsibility to look at are things working, because inherent in critical race theory is the energy, back to your first concept, of informed action to change things, to make them better. Now, when you say that, a lot of people like it just like it is because they're privileged by the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't like the theory because it builds in this energy to say whatever we're learning about the artificial, arbitrary abuse, control, neglect, torture, murder, suboptimization of people, we need to factor that into changing some things. That's what they don't like. So white people actually absolutely are privileged by the current arrangements, even the ones that are white allies trying to change it. And the white allies are the ones that just understand that they are integral to it. And by the accident of their melanin, outer appearance, they get some of the privileges, like they don't get publicly murdered if they're a child at 12 years old in 2 seconds of a police officer coming up to Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Ohio. We just don't kill children. You know, we treat children as children. That's one of the things that racism does. It makes Black children threatening, uh, so threatening that people forget that they're children and they don't really want to invest in that. And so I could go on, but that's a short answer to your topic. It's a way of life for me, which is the unexamined life is not worth living. So we need to examine and inspect, and you need to get diverse people helping you to inspect so that you don't have a clone group of people who have one vantage point on the topic. And that's the value of diversity. Now, the president shut it down because he doesn't want people critiquing America's, quotes, mythology of exceptionalism and level playing field and everything's wonderful, because he's saying, I made America great again. And anybody who critiques it is leftist, radical leftist, and not worth listening to.
Thank you for all that. Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. So something you said earlier was you made this link to critical race theory and law, and something about like a precedent of some kind. For me, critical race theory, I learned about it and applied it to my master's research, and it was the only theoretical perspective that allowed me to understand the subjugation of Black people in this country, like really like on a different level, not just spiritually, emotionally, like as a person walking through, racist society, but as an academic. And I was like, whoa. And for me, it was a precedent. It was like, there's this wonderful intellectual tool that is allowing me to understand and examine what's happened to my people in South Carolina, particularly young boys and young men. And so for me, it was a godsend. And I was like, I didn't even know this existed. I didn't know this tool. I didn't know this was here for me. And I thought, how I wish so many other young students had access to it and understood it and was taught how to apply it. There's not a lot of interest in that. Unfortunately, I found, at least in my attempts to sort of spread critical race theory since I've started intermediate, it's just, there's not a lot of understanding about what it is. And so, yeah, for me, it is a way of life. And for me, it's definitely a methodology. And so the methodology being a method, and then the philosophy that accompanies it and sort of yokes to it. So yeah, so I want to follow up about what you said about like some folks just in this country, like white Americans feeling as though this has no place in the story of America, because there's something I want to explore with you, which is why is it that it seems the we can accept like that narrative, like that narrative can be said out loud and can be put in an executive document from the White House very easily, but when you start talking about the suffering of Black children and the adulting of them and not being able to see them as innocents, essentially, when you start having that conversation just about Blacks suffering in general, but particularly on the topic of children, it's like there is no place. It's like the conversation diverts to culpability, like responsibility. You should be more responsible. Why aren't we able to see Black children for the innocence that they are and understand that there's a larger story here? It's not just about action. It's not fair just to judge someone's action in the case and the whole story of what is the African American youth. Does that make sense at all?
It does. And the key to remember is everything must be examined in context.
Yeah.
So you have a story, and we talk about Homo sapiens being the species wise human beings, but really should be Homo narratus. We're the species that follows stories. And if you can get leaders and leaders of leaders and leaders of leaders of leaders to set up a story, you're going to find most people will end up following that story. So by context, I'm going to get to your question, but the context is we've set up a story in which the dominant ruling class does not want people looking at how things are and how they're set up. So you distract and divert people from doing that close inspection by setting up a false concept. The concept is individualism. There's another ism that's incentivized, recruited, pumped, promoted, and they'll just say, well, just don't take drugs. You have the individual willpower not to take drugs when they have used tax dollars and United States airplanes to fly drugs into Black communities to basically disempower Black women and therefore Black families and to send Black men to jail. So didn't know this because the history isn't going to tell you, the media is not going to tell you, and it's only because Richard Nixon was crazy enough to tape himself as a president and got caught with the Watergate scandal and all of his tapes start coming out that you can see the conversations they had that were held at other points in US history where Black people are attacked by the government.
Yeah.
You do not have other sectors of the population where the FBI is sitting down with the CIA and the president talking about neutralizing populations called Black people. And this starts back in the days of enslavement. So now you have a philosophy in which the people are promoted as individuals. So it's acting like the playing field's level, everybody's fair. Nobody has any privileges that you didn't get except as an individual. Now, turn around and have COVID. Turn around and have a disaster. Now you see corporate people reaching out for handouts. Today, American Airlines laid off 19,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Another airline's laid off 13,000. Big agriculture has been subsidized by the United States government for centuries, decades. Big pharma has been subsidized. The military has been subsidized by everybody's tax dollar, but they'll turn to you and say, well, don't you, Ashley, and don't you, Tom Gordon, be a welfare parent and dare ask for a helping hand in COVID time. So it's a part of a big mythology that you don't have time to totally unpack of a fiction of the individual tied to maintaining their dominance. And in that fiction, racism has a core place because it made anything close to African by physical features or culture devalued to the point that we were defined as not human beings.
That's right.
And built into the Constitution and treated that way. So we're really waiting for the dominant group to catch up with this idea that we're actually people. Can you imagine the phrase Black Lives Matter? Black Lives Matter. They just matter. We didn't ask for the whole world to turn over. We just ask for you to consider us as that our life matters. And then you get this whole anti-energy coming back at you, back to your energy point. Just the thought of us mattering
Yeah.
is such a revolutionary concept for most people. Now you get down to children. Well, children are part of this mythology, the script in which we've been cast as animals. We've been cast as animals.
Yes.
So uh, Michael Vick spent more time in jail than all of the police officers in the last 5 years who killed close to 500 unarmed Black men, women, and children.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, white police officers who kill real human beings are protected and held blameless. Then the taxpayers end up paying 12 million, 15 million, 30 million to the citizen families that just got robbed of their loved ones, but people are not facing the issue that we basically allow this. But Michael Vick, for hosting a dogfight, got more time in prison than all of those white police officers combined for killing over 500 human beings who were unarmed. Now, this is amazing, but it gets back to the child issue. When people see Black, and you can do it flashing it on a screen, or you can do it in real life in Charleston with people sipping tea at a restaurant. When they see someone Black, they exercise their American right to be left alone or to not be disturbed. And unfortunately, they call for police solutions to what ought to be a deeper investigation as to why don't we look and critically examine the script that has cast us as subhuman?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we just look at the script as opposed to reacting in the script as a follower and then calling in the police? Their pedigree is the patrolling of runaway and rebellious enslaved Africans. So their badge actually is the same look as the same badge that came out in that era in which there were rebellions and revolts. And you're down in Charleston, so you folks ought to know about the Stonewall Rebellion. But I bet you if we asked 1,000 people in your city, we would find out that their education system and the media have failed them, just like it fails to teach us anything about the Israeli occupation of Palestine. You don't hear anything about that. It fails to teach you anything about lots of things, including we went to war in Iraq and people said, oops, there were no weapons of mass destruction. So, you know, the media doesn't investigate things. And I think that's the problem in a nutshell. The Black children are caught in a script in which Black is viewed as threatening. And that's why a cop can come up to a 12-year-old in a park and in 2 seconds, not even go through police ritual, which is you would actually have a staging area. If you thought somebody was dangerous, you would evaluate the situation, but in 2 seconds, you kill somebody. You know, that kind of level of threat is built into the script. And either you're going to follow that script or you're going to disrupt it with new energy, including the energy of you inspecting it, examining it as a social fiction weaponized, and it allows
Mm-hmm.
white people to do what my good friend Peter Harris, the writer and poet of the book The Black Man of Happiness, says: you weaponize your innocence as a white person, that you're now in a system that gives you the innocence that you can pick up the phone and call cops and you know that they're liable to torture, maim, or kill a Black child because your peace was disturbed momentarily. We ought to question the real overarching script or paradigm. Paradigm is a fancy word that just means master code or model
Mm-hmm.
that orchestrates the interactions between the players. And most people are like a fish in water. They don't know how wet they are with all of these destructive isms.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for bringing up the point about media. So I sent you a couple stories before we spoke, and I asked you to read them. And I wanted to talk first about the story about the headline: alleged attack. There's a Charleston journalist, PNC story, focus on aggressive palmetto rose peddlers. So first of all, I mean, this is, I feel like a story that's a little bit challenging to talk about because essentially, someone got hurt. This freelance journalist who, by all accounts, from everyone that I know who knows him, Mr. Quentin Washington, very nice man, has done a lot to make a name for himself locally. Has some great interviews. Nice gentleman, but essentially he was, assaulted by young people downtown. And what I my so this story happened, and then I saw in the last year or two another story that happened where I suppose two young youths, a very similar situation. Nobody was assaulted or was claimed to have been assaulted, but there was a circumstance in which things got complicated, and children were pretty much put in front of the police or threatened with potentially being taken away or what have you. So what my takeaway is, I think about the trigger. So I think about, when you read the story, you hear there's this gentleman walking down the street who makes a comment about whether or not a child is in school, these children are in school. And that in itself is enough to incite, an upset from them, apparently. Again, because I don't know the story. I mean, I wasn't there. I haven't spoken to anyone who was there that day, but this is what, we're told. I'm thinking about that trigger. Then the second story I saw, there's a woman outside at a restaurant, and she makes a comment about the language of the young people that she can overhear who are selling roses. And she makes a comment about how if they want to sell more roses, they should really clean up their potty mouth, something like that. And then that triggers them too. I feel very strongly that there's a whole, like there's such a strong subtext here, which is that not only are Americans stressed out, but Black Americans particularly are stressed out. But then I believe there's a different kind of stress felt among our young people who are just growing, finding their way in the world, and are pretty much emerging in a very stressful time. And we're not just talking about COVID-19. We are talking about incident after incident after incident in which Black people are being killed for no reason, really, and there's no justice for them. So and then you take that, and then you take scarcity, all kinds of things, and I just think, well, our youth are really on edge, and I don't mean that to be an excuse, but essentially, there's a larger conversation here that I don't believe gets any play, and it really should. And if we want to take it back a little, we are in the town where nine folks were shot for being present at a Bible study.
Yes.
We're in a town where a middle-aged Black man was running away from a police officer, got shot, and then we saw it play out visually what it would mean for him to be framed, essentially for his own murder, for killing himself, essentially. So this is the environment our Black youth are in Charleston. The compassion, though, I mean, I feel like as Black people, like we understand it. Yes, we get it, but it's almost like we can't really talk about it. It's like we can't really talk about that kind of stress because maybe we're concerned we're making excuses for our youth. You know what I mean? And that's not how I intend for it to sound myself. But I believe that there's more to this conversation, that there's more to the story. The other thing is too, like Dr. Gordon, like looking at this story, there's so many things wrong with this. Like just the language itself. I mean, I took some notes on it. It's just like sellers, aggressive, rogue, unhindered. I think at one point they refer to them as artisans. And there's some off comment about how they add to the tapestry of Charleston, like, well, it's nice to look at them every now and then if they behave. It's sort of like that. There's no talk about this program that apparently they're supposed to be in. I don't think that there's any dollars spent on really youth programming for Black youth, which there should be priority. But again, I don't think that many of us feel as though we can say, hey, where's the Black youth funding? Where's that for our children? We have to say that, and we're not. I'll pause there. But there's more. I have more notes though about the story, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, well, just to harvest two things you said, I think you raise your voice, and anybody listening, and you keep raising it around two things. One is we're going to have to drop can't from our vocabulary, and we're going to have to agree with people that we're not making excuses.
Yeah.
We're looking at choices in context. I think that's the language we got to use, that you don't have anything independent of context. But
Yeah.
the media has failed us because the media typically ignores opportunities and success stories, typically, and they often focus in on choices that are sensational and negative and problematic. So they have a formulaic approach to something. You have a systems mind. So potentially, let's say if you actually were to develop three colleagues in the world of media, broadcast, radio, TV, etc., you potentially could get some of them to start thinking like you, which is there's always choices in context. And I like your language, which is allegedly we have this situation. Now, if we take it as yes, assault is not required in this situation, nor champion, and we're not going to make excuses for it. No reason uh, to make an excuse for it, but you're looking at choices. So one, you'd want to interview a sample of these children, because children, like all human beings, we enter developmentally, we arise in our energy, formatted in our capacities to think and reason. So now the latest science brain research says you got to be 25 years old to make strategic decisions in terms of your brain's development.
Yeah.
It's no accident that in this culture, we spend so much time on individual choices, you get a lot of individual making suboptimal choices. They're coming out of a world in which the context isn't honoring their developmental needs, etc.
And
But
the traumas and the traumas
and the
and the
traumas, exactly. So
yeah.
you end up watching a situation. And I mentioned Michael Vick earlier, but you mentioned Dylan Roof. That he's an armed guy that's suspected of killing multiple people who are black in a church, and the police officer arrests Dylan Roof peacefully, and he declares that he's hungry, and they take him to a fast food joint to get a hamburger. Only in America could you see that kind of privilege
Yeah.
with the armed suspect who's suspected of murder. So back to your point, I'd love to get the perspective of the children. I'd love to get some guidance, because human beings need guidance for their energy. Energy is that capacity. It's
Yeah.
the power to do something. So at 3 years old, they can't assault an adult in Charleston. But at 15 years old or 13 years old, they can. So where are we asking the question that you're asking, which is what's the context that we can really take some of this youthful energy and channel it to something that works for Charleston and all of its youth? Because something like selling roses to tourists and people could be part of a Chamber of Commerce initiative that could really sell the city of Charleston because of all of your great food and all of your great history, etc. It doesn't have to be a negative where one person gets upset. Now, from the children's standpoint, I know that where they went was, one, they could have been triggered by trauma. Two, they could have been triggered by shame. When you are
Mm.
not in school and somebody calls you on it, and somebody doesn't say, well, let's talk about how a society or a city like Charleston could step up so that you wouldn't have to work so hard.
Mm.
And you can find out, as I have found out, because I have done pro bono counseling with people that were once children, and found out why they ended up in jail, and now they're ex-offenders. And they start talking about when they were fifth grade, how they dropped out of school to feed a family. They start talking about being moved from multiple foster homes, so they'd rather be in the street
Yes.
because the foster parents were raping them. They start talking about trauma,
Right. They take
and
their chance.
they started
Yeah.
saying, I had to make it
Yeah.
because the society is failing me. If you listen to the stories, so you want the full picture, you look at the symptoms that the children show you, but they're the least powerful actors. And you could have had two adults with great intent, which is, I'd love to see these children upgrade their game, be in school and not use profanity. That's like a intergenerational advice. But people don't care how much you know if they don't have a relationship with you to know how much you care. So the
Yeah.
advice is unsolicited advice from young people who are already, you don't know the shoes that somebody's walking in. You know, Chad Boseman just died of cancer. A lot of people didn't know the pain he was in. You don't know from rich people committing suicide what they're going through. So you can judge the symptom and step back and say, I'm a pure judge, but it's better to say, what is the contribution that the adults are making to actually position more children to be in school and not on the street selling during school hours, and to have a safe and robust and world-class education? And uh, what kind of programs could we steer people to that they could actually get guidance for all of their energy?
You're correct. Everything you said is correct. You're right on. I trying to close this article out. What I will say is, not once did I read, and if I'm wrong, please someone let me know. But I didn't come across one statement that said a parent or a child denied to offer a comment, denied to be interviewed. So there's not even an attempt to get to know any of these families at all, which I think is just, it's not good journalism. It's just not. And then when even like the phrasing and the story, that it says in one point early on, it says according to merchants, law enforcement, and city officials. These are not the only like stakeholder groups involved in this story. Like there's other ones, namely
And that's
parents.
and that's made up. That's made up too. It's used to weight the argument in favor of the slant of the story, but they didn't interview city officials and law enforcement, the variety of people in Charleston. They just used that as a lead-in phrase to sort of hijack the argument.
Yeah, and it's like the article tries to bring it back somehow. It tries to like sort of, I feel like, just sort of soften the initial blow of its language and its negligence. I feel, but
Right.
it doesn't. But I see the attempt of the writer to do that. The other thing is that's not talked about, which is really important. And and I can't believe it. Like we're out of time. It's 8:15.
Time
We
flies
have
when you're having fun.
but I another 15 minutes. So I hope you'll give me that 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Really need to say this. I think it's important. No one at no point is the welfare of the children ever talked about. I've spoken to folks who have been involved in these programs, and there's a real concern that there's predators out there for these children, because they know that there's an unfriendly relationship, or distrust, I should say, with law enforcement. Number one. Number two, there's a scarcity element to being out there sometimes. I mean, if a child's out there at 8, 9 o'clock, or crazy times of the night, more than likely they're not doing it because they want to. It's not just because they're little artisans and they're just there, to sort of add to the landscape and make a few bucks. It's more than likely they're there because they really need that money. So why aren't we talking about the actual physical threats against these children who are out in the streets? At one point, it is referenced, but it's referenced in it pertains to traffic, like kind of move out of the way. It's more like, let's make sure that they're in this little pod. It has nothing to do with the welfare, the true welfare of the children, which
Right.
is
Right. Right.
and there is a shame element, because I did some youth groups in Charleston, like years back, and there were a few young men who did sell roses, and what I overheard them talking and teasing one of each other about their selling of the roses. And I didn't realize until that moment that there is an element of shame. And, in terms of like having to do that, it's not something that they fully embrace. And so you can get teased about it. So thank you for bringing that up. Is there anything else about this article that you wanted to talk about that stood out to
Yeah.
you?
I think that we need to keep in mind that when children act out, you can have a 3-year-old kick you in the kneecap and tell you to get out of the house. That doesn't mean you run out of the house and you kill the kid. You have to look at developmentally, our responsibility as adults is to provide a safe and developmentally nourishing a space for children. And when they act out, they're actually sending you a signal. It's a call for guidance and love. And love can be a derivative of love, can be more respect at a certain age to let me get my voice into the arena, or it could be I'm bored out of my mind because nobody's actually feeding my mind. But
Yeah.
we don't need to ignore children and self justify that they are the problem, and we can stand apart from it and blame them. No different than we have an adult solution called beating children. So
Yeah.
has a long history. It ties into racism because white preachers used to preach, we're going to beat the devil out of you. And so they tried to justify the beatings of our ancestors, men, women, and children. And Black people, unfortunately, in picking up the spiritual concept that it's all about energy, which we knew. We're the oldest people on the planet, so this doesn't make us better than anybody else. But for thousands and thousands of years, we're only talking to each other about how the world works, and we knew that there were things that were visible and invisible, and that there were sources of things like the sun and the Nile River and other places. So they understood a lot about God, but a lot of this other stuff was imposed on them. Us beating each other and all of this, and frankly, Jesus. You could think of Jesus as an unarmed Black man who got killed by the state. That's what's happening to unarmed Black people right now. The difference is they introduced the propaganda that Jesus is white. So when you stare at that over centuries centuries of that nonsense, then you get a lot of people that actually believe Jesus said he was God, which he never said, and he's white. You hook those
And,
two things up,
and he has an English accent.
and
That's
yeah, like Jesus was a Christian. No, Jesus was not a Christian. So a
yeah.
lot of it is people like to be ahistorical and
Yeah.
identify things as separate from context. So it's easy to blame a kid and say that kid shouldn't have cursed and he shouldn't have hit that person. And that's true. I've been assaulted as a psychologist, trying to do things out of good intent, sometimes in an institution, sometimes in private practice, sometimes in the street, sometimes with one person, with multiple people. You are running the risk every time you deal with another human being of being one thought away from someone attacking you.
Mm.
And their thinking is going to sponsor their choice. So you learn how to approach people, you learn how to be flexible, you learn how to gauge the readiness of people to absorb your intent. But
Yeah.
sometimes that learning curve is costly. And for me, I've had not only physical assaults, I've had knives and ice picks and guns and things brought aboard because people were triggered by something, and I'm an object close at hand, and they're not necessarily honoring my intent, and so now I got to deal with a different dance. So my point is, we shouldn't be beating children. We shouldn't be dismissing them. I don't care what so-called race they are. In fact, white people are sourced from the most ancient people on the planet, Black people. They're a derivative of us. Our DNA is similar. We're one human species. That's every difference is understandable by migration and climate and cultural input. So we need to stop beating people, beating them down, browbeating them, killing them on sight, blaming them on sight. We need to listen. They're making a call for love. They're making a call for love. And if we can hear that call, we'll respond with the systems thinking that you're bringing to the discussion. And we'll be better as adults. And adults in media do us a disservice by making every story about the individual.
Mm. Thank
There are
you.
no
Well said.
individuals. There are no individuals. Every baby will die if there's not source energy from a
Mm.
community of adults that are willing to invest in that baby. And you don't have people at 12 years old, even under proper guidance and thinking patterns, that even cross the street without danger. So we ought to think of them that way. They're our future, and we ought to invest in that future and expect distorted behavior and choices along the way. We ought to expect it. You shouldn't be disappointed when children actually don't do what mature adults do because they're maturing. And
Mm.
yet we have adults that actually behave like stuck on stupid and are willing to be ahistorical and champion the perfection of America, which is not a perfect place. No, we got a lot of room for opportunity to be better.
To do. For sure. Thank you for that. I'm going to wrap that part up just by saying that the story does mention this group called the Phoenix Project, a Sharia Washington, who, along with, I believe, a local pastor, Pastor Thomas Dixon, a few leaders came together and have really committed to mentoring these young men, young teens, and so it looks like there's a positive outcome in terms of that. It's not like they were just sort of subjected to these situations of law enforcement, and there is no carry through or continuance of engagement with them. So they're going to be helping them, which is really good news.
Good.
Okay, so moving on, I need to talk about. We need to talk about this. The second story I really wanted to talk about was the story about the principal, the comments of the principal at Academic Magnet. And this is really sensitive for me because I get very, to me, that the topic of like intellectual ethics, if you will, is really like a sensitive, important topic that we don't, I don't think, talk about enough. The ways in which knowledge has been manipulated in the lives of Black people, and the most sinister level, even spiritually. You're talking about even abbreviating Bibles, the psych job that's been done on us, and the intellectualizing of subjugation and oppression and brutality, the intellectualizing of it, which I believe we're seeing even now when you read documents like the one that came out of the White House, saying, "Oh, this is all propaganda. This is all," it's, to me, it's very dangerous territory. And so I want to talk about it a little bit because this is Academic Magnet is the second highest rated high school in the U.S. But of course, it's been plagued with like a lot of criticism because it's mostly white, and its origins, its ties are African American. So it's rooted in a program originally at Burke High, and it's also geographically anchored to Bonds Wilson, which is an historically Black high school that my mother actually went to. So the story comes out, and it's like, oh, we haven't had much luck diversifying. We've talked to some low-income people or families, and yes, it's we're making some progress, but essentially the numbers are the same. I responded. I posted on my page. I said, just keep it white. I said, keep it white. Keep it as it is, because I really reject, and I hope other people are, other folks like Black folks are starting to understand that we can't. I feel as though we can't put all of our eggs in the basket of white institutions, believing that they are going to, like, as though they're our golden ticket to a successful life. And that's really my issue here. And if these institutions are fine as they are, and they have to get funding, like philanthropic, like they have to get donors to diversify, and they have to go through all this toil and trouble, then just keep it. Because I believe we really need to be creative and create institutions where our children can just really be themselves. The key word here was socializing. That's what I took issue with. The principal mentioned that there's socializing involved in getting, I'm presuming, Black, brown, and just generally low-income children ready for their school. And I just thought I did not appreciate that language.
Yeah, you took it as a blame term, that the socializing seemed to put the deficit on the would-be children applicants.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that's how I took it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it felt essentially, my feeling is children should be able, I think part of the issue is like we've sort of done this before. Like Black children have been forced into white schools and forced to integrate them. And we have a generation that has paid a very high cost for that. Some physically, definitely psychologically. I mean, this was not easy, including my older sister, who, was part of, desegregating a school that's on my street. So, I mean, haven't we been here before? Haven't we done this before? Why are we still looking at these kinds of schools and thinking, well, we should really get in there. This is where we should be. Talk to me about that. Because I like I said, I had trouble with it.
Yeah, so we're here because systems don't spontaneously change. They oscillate just a wee bit until the crisis goes down. And I remember earlier I said I'm a leadership solutions coach. And so what's happening at the school is you have the leadership making excuses and the system isn't going to change. You also have on the other side, from the demand side, you have families that believe, as was true under apartheid, racial apartheid and segregation, Jim Crow segregation, that the white schools will get better resources than
Yeah.
the other schools. So they got that history.
Yeah.
And so in this particular situation, I'm going to deal with both sides of it. One is you can change that situation if you would get that leader and that leadership of cabinet, whoever's the cabinet for that leader. You know, school is sometimes assistant principals and maybe head teachers, etc. But use it as a kitchen cabinet if you worked at the level of the excuse. So you would have to incentivize those leaders to actually think differently. And the way to do that is to say, if we didn't actually change the demographic profile of our faculty and our student body by a certain target goal, then people wouldn't get paid. And you would watch and see how fast people would stop making excuses and actually do what they claim they want to do, but they don't give it anything but lip service. So you have to structure it so it's a leadership issue because she's basically making excuses, or he, the principal, is making excuses, blaming the would-be children. This is back to our earlier conversation. We have
Yep.
a culture with a script, and anytime it comes to black and brown people, they like to make us the deficient, threatening members of the script. All she's doing is following it. Now, if she has really good intent, you can give her my contact information and say, look, current state, you didn't get the target, but going forward, let's see if you can get some help actually doing this if you still care about it. That's one way to deal with it at that level. The last thing on that is if you want to influence the system, you always have to work at least one level above it. So you would have to work with the superintendents of the school district, or you'd have to work with the legislative's office in the city government to put influence on that particular school. So you have to do both and. Now, thirdly, you mentioned on the demand side, why are we chasing this thing? And in a moment of frustration, you said, "Oh, keep your school," and you know, you
Yeah.
spoke, you spoke, you spoke out of the energy of frustration, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
It
I
let
get it. I
it
get it.
stay in its current state.
I
Let
get it. I get it.
plan B.
Now, here's the deal with frustration. Every systems thinking leader that thinks about energy knows that for the moment, your energy got captured because you noticed such a huge gap
Yeah.
between leadership excellence and making excuses. You also notice an integrity gap that people weren't willing to say to you, eyeball to eyeball, I've got the right heart and intent. This is a tough goal. I'll have to own I didn't ask for help and I failed to meet the goal. And going forward, I'm going to humble myself and be vulnerable enough to say, I need your help, Ashley, because a diverse group of thinkers can strategize to get this victory. So people don't want to be vulnerable. That's an integrity issue. They're pretending that they actually did everything they could do and got no yield. This is like
Yeah.
saying I caught no fish, but you basically didn't get in the pond at all.
Mhm.
So it's an integrity issue. You know, don't pretend to us, and that's where the game is old. We have lots of people chasing better resources. It wasn't that the black people in your mother's era necessarily thought that being around white people is going to be better. They knew that their schools were not equal under segregation.
Right. Yeah.
We didn't have textbooks, we didn't have microscopes, etc. So I think you keep the pressure on both directions. One is we keep the pressure on this academy to actually reflect the global landscape. And so Charleston needs to be a world-class city with world-class education. The faculty, these are the permanent citizens of the school, and the student body, the transient citizens of the school, need to have racial diversity, period. We're going to
Yeah.
incentivize that, or we're going to be held accountable, and we're going to strategize to make it work. Number two, I think you got to have Black people withdraw their allegiance to established white run schools. I agree with you on that. There's a psychological moment, and we're in the middle of a moment and a movement that if we don't claim it, we will become like cocaine addicts. We will become addicts to believing that we must have white dominant school systems in order to prepare our children for the world. When really the United States is not blazing any trails globally compared to some other cultures on education. And really, truth be told, it's exactly what you said. The nature of the children, the human being, is we are at our best when we're in a space where we know the people care about us.
Yes.
So if that faculty is making excuses, they don't care about us. If we can get a white, black, brown faculty that cares about us, these children are going to thrive. And that's what we need to pay attention to. That's the priority. And you're going to have some situations where we're going to have to do what you said, which is withdraw allegiance to the standard default education, which is always subpar, always full of lies. They do not tell you the truth deliberately and unintentionally. A lot of them don't do the research to know the truth. And as one white leader of an academy said to me when I tried to put my 5 kids in the academy, he hit me on classism and he said, "Your kids are from public school." So now this is a classism thing. He said,
Yes.
"We prefer to put them back a grade without testing them." I said, "Wait a minute. You mean you're going to lump them in a population of Philadelphia children from public school and assume that they're deficient and you don't know anything about their exposure, their travel, the books they've read? You're not going to test them?" He said, "Yep, because we know and believe that Philadelphia children will be educationally behind our academy children." Number two, he said, and they will start with learning that civilization starts with Greece. And I said to him, uh, you know, he said, "I'm Dr. Bloop de Bloop." And I said, "Well, I'm Dr. Gordon. And are you telling me that the Greeks, there was no civilizations in the world before Greece? Because the Greeks even wrote about how much they learned in the Nile Valley civilization. So how do you justify starting with Greece?" He said, "Dr. Gordon, I do it because it's my preference and I'm more comfortable. And now I have made my preference and the preference of my board and my cabinet
Wow.
policy." And this is what racism runs off of. It runs off of a weaponized innocence that we are actually doing something meritorious when we're actually doing something that's familiar, habitual, and comfortable, and that we become addicted to. What you're really saying is, I can't trust the dominant group to break the addiction for me. I've got to trust that some Black people are going to step up and educate our children. And I think that's an empowered way to format your energy, to loop back to the way we started this talk. This is a moment because all energy is undifferentiated until it's formatted. So you're talking about formatting your energy with a declaration that we will have people that love our children,
Yes.
teach our children. And I think at the same time, you keep the pressure on the academy because they're getting taxpayer dollars, just like the police are getting taxpayer dollars, just like the victims of police abuse are getting taxpayer settlements. You got to keep the pressure on multiple levels. But I want to underscore the level you brought up, which is a lot of us that historically, that's the way we had to learn because we knew they didn't care about us and we
Hmm.
had no access to what they were going to offer us.
Thank you for getting it and talking me down because like I said, there was some overwhelm there, but I stand by it. I do. because that's how
The principle is sound. The
yeah.
principle is sound. You had a moment, and you can put me on speed dial and all of your core people because ultimately you're a systems thinker. And as Paul Robeson said, the battlefield is everywhere. There is no sheltered rear. So we've got to fight and have energy deposits in various places, including really strong homeschooling
Yeah.
and cluster homeschooling. And we've got to keep the pressure also on people that will go to public and private schools.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And unless you said like better resources, I don't think that better resources should come at the cost of someone's spirit and their
Nope.
soul.
Nope. This loops back to your title. Will we let racism take such a toll that it damages our soul? And I said no to that. No, the answer is no. Let's loop back to your question. We have the energy and we stand on the shoulders, sacrifice, and effort of people that have gone before us who did more with less than what we have, who figured out a way to get from Mississippi to Canada or Vancouver based on the North Star,
Yeah.
not having a credit card or education, anything. So you're looking at a group of tough-minded people saying, no, my soul is not for sale and it
Yeah.
will not be destroyed. So we've done
Yeah.
that at every step of the way, including when they made other Black people breed with us and beat us. And we've had horrible things happen to us. And as Maya Angelou said in her poem, and still we rise.
Yeah.
And still we rise. So you add a great question, and the answer is always that judgment, the final judgment hasn't been rendered. And we have to play the game to see and deliver our best as people have done before us. If you think about each one of us has two parents, and now you've got four grandparents, and now you've got eight great grandparents, and now you've got 16 great great grandparents. And you do that over 12 generations, you got over 4,000 people who have given you your DNA capacity and your cultural capacity to be both focused and flexible so that you can solve problems that haven't even showed up when they were giving you guidance and love. They're not going to even be in the world that you're going to be in. So they're planting seeds in you, like planting a tree that they know they couldn't sit under the shade of the tree they're planting. We got to make decisions that actually are for 7 generations out, our grandchildren's great great grandchildren. And
That's right.
that's the mindset you have, Ashley. I recognized it instantly when I met you, and you are just articulating in this show that we're under attack. And that's not new. The government, we're the only group that the government has attacked. Indigenous people and African people. We're the group that's attacked. Now we can have some crazy citizens assault and attack various people from time to time, but they literally sold human beings out of the White House. They
Yeah.
literally brought drugs into LA when we were becoming powerful, as you had with the Contra scandal under Reagan. A lot of this came out, etc. And people don't know this history of our attack. And you just asked the question: is our attack so poisonous, so deadly, that our soul is going to be destroyed? Are we going to be destroyed as a people? Because on some days it looks pretty murky. And I'm saying, between me, you, Ashley, and our network, we're not going to all be depressed on the same day. There'll be some days when we're frustrated, push that speed dial, and know that our soul is never for sale. And we shall restore sanity to the world, and we shall create a better world because that's the people we are. We are love, we're ethical,
Yes.
and we will do that. That's our character, that's who we are. And this restoration idea goes back 70,000 years to the concept of Saruj Ta, that you can go to the pyramids now. And my father, at a time when we were being lynched and murdered and at the back of the bus, took me to Egypt and took me to the pyramids where I could see painted on the wall the stories and the things that are the root of what is Christianity and other religions. But you could literally see these concepts being unfolded. And actually, the paint on the wall is over 15,000 years old. Just the paint. Imagine how much science and chemistry people had to know to just construct the paint. You can't paint your house for 8 years without having to paint your house again. So
Yeah.
you're talking about the deliberate attacks on a population to kill or destroy or neutralize them, and still we rise. Still we rise. So, no, we will be under attack, but we're also going to challenge it as we've done in every generation, every time, because we are love. That's who we are.
So happy right now. Thank you for that. So we're totally out of time, Dr. Gordon. But I'm gonna ask you to offer one more thing, if you will. I have, I've come a long way in terms of it's been a personal struggle to be more vocal. I'm a very private person. Just that's just kind of who I am. Introverted, private, like keeping to myself. I like my own company, that kind of thing. But in this work and in this environment, and given like the realities that are in front of us, there's a time we all have to sort of recognize our role, and all of our roles are different. Some of
Right.
us are out there, protesting with our masks on, just front and center, and just you know, confronting chaos, right there, like on the streets of Charleston, all over this country. Some of us are, just working other avenues, working other places, doing other things. We all have different talents and abilities. But one thing I have found in Charleston that I think that for a while too, I was sort of sickened by, was just this feeling that I couldn't really say what was on my mind. Like there's this suppression of voice, and this active suppression of voice. You talk to Black professionals in Charleston, and everyone, especially in education, will give you a story about how they either know someone who was fired for speaking up and particularly standing for Black children, or someone who was sort of swindled out of a position that they had earned. I mean, there's what I find is that when we talk about this legacy of slavery and oppression, this oppression seems to be so prevalent when it comes to what we share and what we think we can share. Even me, I know there's times I posted things, and I know that I'm sure that there have been thoughts out there that maybe that aren't so good girl. You know what I mean? Like that sense, like we have to be, especially women, like we have to be good women. We have to be,
Right.
Rise above it all or something. But if you could just say something about, if you're such an honest person, did you always like approach the world this way? It sounds like you had wonderful, parents, father,
Yeah.
probably aligned you to be very honest and speak, walk, talk your integrity from a very early age. But some of us really struggle with our voice. And I would just like to leave, if you could leave something for those who are watching who want to say so much more, and don't feel like they can because of financial responsibilities or fear of being looked at sideways, like and being too pro-Black. That's another one too. That these are real fears that Black people have, and in Charleston in particular.
Yeah,
So
and you would expect it under racism that the energy would be sent out that we are not to unite, we're not to be in dissent, we're
yes,
not to transform and be empowered, transformative agents. So you're basically following a script and seeing a script and then choosing your moments. You can't fight all the time, you'll burn yourself out.
yeah,
You have to pick your battles. And my rule of thumb is hold on to your vision of greatness, your voice, and your accountability to beat yesterday, which will lead to victories. So you don't have to instantly get a victory because some things are complex. You don't have to do it yourself. You may want to say, well, to preserve my best energy, let me bounce this off of 3 or 4 potential allies so that it's not just my voice alone. You have to preserve and amplify your own energy and make choices not out of fatigue and just frustration. After tonight, I hope you understand if you're frustrated, that means you're a leader. Potentially, you're a leader because you now care about something. The people who are not frustrated are either so privileged that they want their status quo, or they are looking elsewhere. You've looked, seen, and care. You see a gap. Now you may need allies to close that gap. So don't stress yourself out further by trying to lift up a 200-pound person with your little pinky finger. You want to be smart and strategic. And so I say this is a new way of thinking about preserving yourself, but not allowing toxic isms to mute you and to take you out of the game. So you're picking and choosing your moments for your voice, and you're making your voice in concert with other voices. And sometimes you delay your voice because you know you need to do some things to cultivate the ground. So you're sort of under promising because once your voice is out there, it sets an imaginary clock in your mind about how fast things ought to manifest.
Mhm.
So sometimes you silently voice it to yourself that enough is enough. And I will not sacrifice my child to the slaughter of the meat grinder. You don't have to voice it all the time out publicly, but you voiced it to yourself and to your closest circle. And that way you preserve your best energy, you build your allies, and then you look for leverage. You couldn't lift up a 200-pound person with just your pinky finger. You don't have the leverage.
Mhm.
But you can lift up a person with their cooperation. They might actually get in the chair that you're trying to lift them up to. All right. So we're going to think about your challenge as a point in time. I'm not linear. I'll have some moments that are tough, but I'm going to recover quickly. And I think tonight we take away this mythology that you're not a good girl, a good woman. We take away because that's all part of another ism. It goes right along with individualism, and it's called perfectionism. And what you do is line those two up in the service of racism, classism, and some of these other uh, social isms. Now, perfectionism says you spend your energy trying to make sure that you're not an easy target to be criticized, blamed, shamed, judged for something that's not ideal. And that could be your eyebrows, or it could be the last thing you said, the last thought you had. So it's a total mythology. It's designed to control people and to keep their voices muted. Now that you noticed it, you got to say, I'm not smoking crack or perfectionism or individualism anymore. That's how
Got it.
you do it. I'm going healthy. And you get fired, you get challenged sometimes. I got fired from a hospital recently for just saying we need to upgrade the diet of the people that come to this hospital. That's our ethical responsibility.
Mm.
And we should not be given should not be given free cartons of cigarettes to the people in this hospital just to keep them calm off a nicotine high. And I got fired. It's an occupational hazard that when you voice a vision that you have of greatness,
Mhm.
you're going to be disrupting a bunch of isms. So, you make the choice. Am I going to say my soul is for sale in case, you wear around and say, I'm for sale? Well, Charleston has a lot of auction blocks. They ought to be in museums. You shouldn't be saying, I'm going to get on an auction block and sell my soul to go along and get along and mute my voice. No, you're saying my vision, my voice, victories that I propose, or what is needed to affirm, advance human life. That's the business I'm in. And if this academy gets your message, then they can work with you as a partner. And people that partner with you will share that value. They will believe that wisdom and foolishness is widely distributed. It is not in any one racial group. And that race was made up off of a lie to basically conquer people. The same way religion is a handmaiden of conquerors. And they begin to distort spiritual principles and package them in a way that sends you off to a target that is going to guarantee that you are not challenging the system. And your mother is old enough. You ask your mother, did she mute her voice at Bonds Wilson? because she was certainly yelling at me when I played at C.A. Johnson against her.
Oh.
And you ask her, what did she muster up in the way of energy
Mhm.
to prepare herself? Because she grew up in an era, just as I did, that on some Saturday afternoon, somebody white with less than a fifth grade education would knock on your door, often smoking a cigarette, with a Bible, trying to convince you to be a Christian. When Black people participate in a lot of religious activity anyway, and you sat there and listened to that person's spiel because you were afraid of your house being bombed or being lynched for you not deferring to that. And I had a father who was a ex-sharecropper who educated himself to speak 5 languages and was a professor of comparative religion and philosophy, to
Wow.
have to sit there and listen to an uneducated white man who finishes his recruitment speech by telling you, if you're a good Negro, you get to go to colored heaven because the water fountains have the sign colored, the back of the bus is for you, and his speech is all about, if you're good, you follow this white Jesus and you get to go to colored heaven. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, that's all problematic in every step of the way. As a child, I couldn't interrupt it because they were afraid of the house being bombed. So now you step back, and I'm not a child, and I'm saying to you, you're not a child. You got children and 7 generations to think about.
Yeah.
You won't be muted. I'm betting money on and milkshakes on this.
Look at that. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you also too for bearing with me in the beginning where I had a lot of technical issues. I couldn't even hear what you were saying for the most part for the first few minutes. That was challenging, but thank God it all worked out. It all came together. So thank you for helping get us through that time, and thank you for all your wisdom. Thank you for all your expertise. Thank you for sharing also your latest work experience. I mean, it's very it's nice to know like people are going through real things, and the consequences, if you want to, like you say, walk in integrity, sometimes you have to take the hits for that.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so thank you for sharing that, because you really didn't have to, but I appreciate that, and I hope everyone takes note. um, Thank you. Is there anything you want to say? Anything else? This is great, and I hope you come back. Please, please, please. Can we do this again, please?
Namaste. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day and a great life.
All right.
We are one.
All right.
All
Have
righty.
a good evening. Bye-bye. And thank you for all
Bye-bye.
tuned in. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.